Okay. The 8 chapters. Shemona Prokim. We've read the introduction, and I'm just going to do a little synopsis of it. These are the chapters that Rambam wrote as an introduction to Pirke Avos, the sayings of our fathers. The synopsis for the introduction to the introduction of Pirke Avos reads as follows. As he said he would, Rambam set out to comment on Pirke Avos. But since Pirke Avos isn't easy to understand despite appearances, and since not everyone can abide by what it offers, and since it touches upon such important, profound issues, Rambam decided to provide us with 8 chapters as an overall introduction to Pirke Avos. So Rambam treats Pirke Avos kind of like the way most people treat the weather. Everybody talks about it, nobody does anything about it. That we all learn Pirke Avos. We read it between Mincha Marav during the summertime. But who is living the life of Pirke Avos? And this troubled Rambam, that people could read it and learn it but not live it, right? Because he understood Pirke Avos is not about a purely intellectual experience. It has to be one that's lived, right? Which is true of all halacha. But even more so, Pirke Avos, which doesn't have a Gemara attached to it. It's a Mishnah by itself. Number 2, our sages assured us, this is very important, that anyone who lives by the words of Pirke Avos will achieve piety, chasidus. Since piety is a spiritual rank that is determined by our character, and since it is just below nevuah, prophecy, that leads directly to it, Rambam set out to explain all that here too. The relationship between, he uses the term really chasidus, meaning as Pirke Avos did, not in the sense of a member of a Hasidic sect, which obviously didn't exist prior to the Baal Shem Tov, but a Chassid was viewed as somebody who was pious beyond the knowledge of the law. A tzaddik was somebody who was punctilious about the law. A Chassid was at a higher level than a tzaddik, that he was the one who was not only punctilious about the details of the law, but also about the spirit of the law. Number 3, Rambam doesn't claim to have originated any ideas here. He acknowledges that they derive from the words of Chazal, our sages, from philosophers, and from others whom he often quotes verbally without citations in order to explain the many things that are hidden away in Pirke Avos. Okay. Chapter 1. The human Nefesh and its capacities. Introduction to Chapter 1. Okay. There's a lot in here, so sometimes we need a foundation for everything. If we're ever going to better ourselves, we need to know just who we are and what we're made of. Rambam's point in this chapter is that ultimately we're each comprised of a single indivisible self called the Nefesh, the multi-hued core of our being that expedites nearly everything we do and are. And since self-improvement depends upon Nefesh improvement, and that in turn depends upon an understanding of the makeup of the Nefesh and its components, i.e. who we are and what we're made of, we'll be examining all that here. So he's talking about the Rambam's understanding really of the soul. Nefesh we refer to as meaning a life force. We say there's Nefesh Elokis. Chassidus says this to say a Nefesh, a godly Nefesh, and a Nefesh Behema, an animal Nefesh, the desire to just live. Right? And there is a difference between these. Rambam is going to talk about his understanding of Nefesh, which predates this. Maybe not. Maybe the Zohar predates. But in terms of the Hasidic explanation, he predates that. We'll thus discover that there are 5 components to the Nefesh. You'd think all these 5 things are going to be very transcendental. Let's read what he says they are. Number 1, our digestive systems. Number 2, our 5 senses, our imaginations, our emotions, and our intellects. While we can certainly consciously steer some of them in any direction, the others carry on by design alone and are beyond our control. This theme will prove to be crucial in our understanding of free will specifically, and the human condition in general, as we will see. The last point Rambam makes here in this chapter is that reason as in logic, is a form, quote, a form like something you shape things with, the crucial distinctive dimension of our nefesh. So that reason is the crucial distinctive dimension of our nefesh, while its other components are merely its matter. The idea of substance and form, these concepts, right? And what we must actuate our reason if we are to ever achieve our potential. While Rambam doesn't delve into that here, he does elsewhere. Okay. So that's the author's introduction to Rambam's first chapter, and now we begin. Okay. Daki nefesh ha'adam achas v'yesh la puyos haraba shonios. It is important to know that the human nefesh is one in number. It's a single unit, but it has many different functions. So we go to the notes here. By the way, I hope next week to have this for you. They told me that it's due. When Rambam says here that the human nefesh is one in number, but it has many functions, he is touching upon a momentous issue that we'll now address. The issue of who am I?
Yeah.
In fact, we're each a melange of organically wedded but dissimilar aspects of ourselves that are often at odds. We're a mixture of these things. There are times when the body reigns and we identify our beings with rank physicality. You know, you pass by a bakery and you see a delicious piece of pastry, right? And all that drives you, you start to salivate, right?
Yeah.
That you're being driven just by your physicality at that point, right? Other times our emotions reign, and we're swept away by one feeling or another. By the way, probably the feeling that is the most powerful in terms of sweeping us away is revenge, right? And we've all been at an experience where we felt, I will do whatever is necessary to make sure he doesn't succeed.
Yeah.
Right? I will cut off my nose to spite my face in order to do that. Yeah. It's a very powerful feeling. Right? At other times, our emotions reign and we are swept away by one feeling or another. Yet at other times, our intellect reigns, and we are either very crafty, perhaps, or sagacious, wise, and centered in our minds. All in all, though, Rambam's point is that we are each a single person with a number of different capacities. The self, the nefesh, is the conductor behind the miscellany of instruments that comprise our beings, and it somehow defines and infuses an orchestra with its will and its intentions. In point of fact, many compare God's role in the universe to the nefesh's own role in the life of the human being. God does for the universe what the nefesh does for the person.
Wow.
Which makes sense because we hold that the nefesh is a piece of God within us.
So sort of like the micro and the macro.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. It is the micro and the nefesh. And, you know, there's the expression in the Gemara, he who saves one life saves a world, a universe, right? So if we know that the universe is controlled by God, what's controlling that one life? It should be the nefesh, God's representative in the person. A question that will come up later though, is exactly which parts of ourself do we control and which not? Or in other words, what are we responsible for in our beings and what is God responsible for? This will be discussed later on when we consider free will and personal responsibility in chapters 2 and chapter 8. Okay? Some of these functions themselves have been called nefeshot, which is why some, such as physicians of antiquity, have thought that people have several nefeshot, have more than one nefesh. The greatest of them all claimed that there were three, the natural, the dynamic, and the spiritual. The greatest of them all that the Rambam is referring to is the Greek doctor, Hippocrates, right? He lived around 460 before the Common Era, and he's considered the father of medicine. And he understood the human being to be made up of the natural, the dynamic, and the spiritual. You may be shocked that Rambam is now quoting, a Greek physician, Rambam himself being a great physician. And we know that doctors all take the Hippocratic Oath, right? That it was written by Hippocrates, the responsibility of a physician to heal. Rambam understands a basic principle. He understands that if you say that there is no wisdom among the nations, you're a fool. And if you say that there's Torah among the nations, you're an apostate. Right? So it means...
What's an apostate?
It means an apostate is somebody who not simply doesn't believe in Judaism, because there are many very decent Jews who don't have a belief in Judaism. It means somebody who has a great understanding of Yiddishkeit, who's grown up and learned and thought it through, right, and denies it.
Oh.
Right. And such a person is called an apostate. It's actually a Greek word for turning your back on someone. So, for instance, when you see, you see a friend who you know is Jewish driving up Bathurst Street on Shabbos, right? Is he violating Shabbos? Yes. Is he an apostate? No. Does he know he shouldn't drive on Shabbos? Intellectually, he has an understanding that Jews don't drive on Shabbos. But does he have an understanding, as you and I might have an understanding, of not driving on Jewish, not just on Shabbos, not just halachically why not, but in this sense of understanding what the gift of Shabbos is. If you understand what the gift of Shabbos is and then you throw it in the garbage, that's very serious. But if you didn't understand what the gift of Shabbos was and it was laying there on the ground and you tossed it into the trash can, it's very sad and unfortunate, but you haven't done something evil, right? As a person who has a complete understanding of it. An apostate requires being very knowledgeable.
Oh my.
It's hard to find such a person today.
Yeah.
Okay, so some of these functions, we read this thing about Hippocrates. Okay. Some of these functions are also called capacities, or parts, which is why the term parts of the Nefesh is often used. For instance, by many philosophers, nevertheless, they speak of parts. They do not mean the Nefesh can be divided into parts the way the body can. They're merely accounting for the different functions of the Nefesh, which are all nonetheless integral parts of one Nefesh. Now, what's very important to understand here, and I want to back up to the three parts in a second, is there is an idea, we talk about sfirot, right? We talk about it a lot during the Omer, this sphere, that sphere, counting the sphere.
Yeah.
And we say chesed and bina and chod, yisod, different malchus, different functions, right? As if to say, these are the different departments of God. Right? That's a mistake. Right? That God is Tam, God is simple. God is undivided. God is a single entity, whatever that means. Right? But we have trouble understanding that. We need to compartmentalize. And so we create understandings of God with which we can relate. The most primitive of these understandings, of course, is the hand of God.
Yeah, where's his hand?
Is that the right hand or the left hand?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
No, this is something so that when I explain it to my young child or to somebody who is very primitive, that they will relate to a very powerful human being. But of course it's absurd. Right? So, and that's true even with Sfirot, it's true with everything, right? That these are man-made, they may be inspired by God, but they are not the actual essence of the nature of God, which is, we understand to be Tam. It's simple. When I say simple, I don't mean like simple-minded. I mean simple that it is complex but not complicated. I guess that's what I'm saying. The difference is here. I just want to go back to where we said, remember that Hippocrates used the term of these three qualities.
Yeah,
right?
dynamic.
That they were
Action, dynamic.
the natural, the dynamic, and the spiritual. Right? And so the note here says the natural, dynamic, and the spiritual. That is to say, the physicians of antiquity believed that we are comprised of three separate selves: the lowest self, which is identified nativistic, primitive needs, the just straight desires; the more creative, animate, dynamic self, which is identified with action and change; and the higher non-material self, which is identified with the transcendent. They consequently saw each of us as three-roomed storehouses of inner conflict and contradiction, with nothing uniting those rooms other than their shared accommodations. In contrast, Jewish philosophy sees each individual as a unified field. It's a very important concept, right? Now let's go back to this because we have to go to note number 3 at the back of the book. I appreciate your patience with all this.
Yeah, no.
So we said that they do not mean that the Nefesh can be divided into parts the way the body can. They're merely accounting for the different functions of the Nefesh, which are nonetheless integral parts of one Nefesh. Note number 3. What do they mean? Where is the one? If we follow the wording here, we notice something quite interesting. After starting the first paragraph off with a short statement about Pirke Avos, Rambam then mentioned that he decided to expand the subject. It apparently became clear to him that since Pirke Avos is difficult to live up to, though easy enough to understand, and since it leads to personal perfection and true good fortune, that he could no longer settle for the sort of straightforward explanation that he had apparently originally planned. He'd have to offer even more. We'll go a little bit further. You okay?
Yes.
Okay. As you know, improving a person's character amounts to healing his nefesh and its capacities. Healing the nefesh's capacity. Apparently, the idea that self-improvement is connected to character improvement was axiomatic in Rambam's time, since he says, as you know, improving a person's character amounts to healing his nefesh. The modern age, however, seems to have united that bond. Seems to have untied that bond. Taking self-improvement to be rooted in material improvement, professional improvement, improvement in interpersonal skills, and improvement in one's knowledge base instead. We thus seem not to see self-improvement as character development so much as circumstance development. It's like professional development, really.
Development, yeah.
Accordingly, we often allow ourselves to admire and emulate immoral, ill-mannered, selfish, base people simply because they are wealthy, powerful, popular, or knowledgeable. We permit ourselves to be lesser people than we'd objectively want ourselves to be in order to achieve circumstantial development. It would do us all well to step back for a moment and identify which form of improvement we are seeking, and to garner the strength necessary to strive for true self-improvement.
That's very true nowadays.
Yeah, that's not so easy. And I think he says it in notes 4 and 5. Okay, I think we're going to finish at the end of this note because it's a very long note.
Okay.
And we'll hold it.
Continue on next week.
Yeah. Yeah.
We can cover it next week.
Yeah. I'm wondering if we should... Let me read a little bit, and we might back up over it.
Okay.
This paragraph is more than a little mysterious, I want to tell you, and tantalizing also points to much to come. The idea that it is not easy for most people to abide by, Pirke Avos, what is said in Pirke Avos alludes to Rambam's forthcoming thesis that some people would not be expected to follow its dictates, because Pirke Avos is, for the most part, directed towards the pious, and not everyone is or can be pious, though everyone can take much of Pirke Avos to heart and apply it to his life. Now this should remind you of the lessons of the Tevo Yom, right? The person who is becoming pure. Right? His statement that Pirke Avos fosters great perfection also resonates with what we'll be discussing later on. In point of fact, Rambam spoke about the idea of achieving perfection by taking Pirke Avos to heart on his writing, in his writings. See his introduction to the commentary on the Mishnah. His claim that Pirke Avos also fosters great perfection and true good fortune alludes to the world to come. For Rambam said explicitly later on in his writings, the Torah study in general, which obviously includes the study of Pirke Avos, leads us to perfection and enables us to earn a place in the world to come. He says this in the Guide to the Perplexed, 327. So we would do well now to elaborate on the Rambam's concept of perfection, as well as his explanation of the world to come. The Hebrew term for perfection is shlemos, meaning complete. It can also be translated as wholeness or fullness. The Rambam indicates that the aim of Pirke Avos is to instruct us in how to achieve shlemos, by encouraging us to be ethical and to rectify our deeds by pursuing personal and intellectual virtues. See his commentary at 5.2 on Pirke Avos. At one point, Rambam let us know, though, that not everyone is constitutionally cut out to achieve shlemos, as we indicated above. See the Nevukim, the Guide to the Perplexed. At another point, he reveals that ultimately one's degree of shlemos corresponds to his degree of closeness to God. Furthermore, there are two sorts of closeness to Him, to God. The kind achieved by acting in godly way in this world, and one achieved by understanding Him as He really is. See the Guide to Perplex again. At yet another point, Rambam assures us that there isn't a single mitzvah that doesn't bring us closer to shlemus, to completeness, to fullness, or that doesn't inhibit something that would prevent one from achieving it. See his letter to the Maimonides. Nevertheless, he goes on to reveal that there are actually 4 orders of shlemus. The first order hinges on one's material circumstances, what he owns and what its quality, quantity, or worth. With this order, neither touches upon one's essential being, nor is it especially noble. Right?
Yeah,
so he's saying it's very hard to be a complete person if you don't have dinner, if you can't eat. There are minimum material requirements that are part of it. Right? The second hinges on one's physical circumstances, his health, his strength, his constitution. It too is neither essential nor especially noble. If a person has a deformity, or if a person has a physical impairment, right? It's hard for him to be complete. He can have a lot of good things going for him, but he may not be able to reach that completeness. I cannot, when my son throws a ball and I don't catch it, he runs after it and picks it up. I can only take 1 or 2 steps running, but my knees hurt too much. It's too painful. I can't do it. It's not a sign of badness. It's just a reality. Right? Third order of shlemus hinges on one's social circumstances, his character and how he interacts with others. While this class is certainly more noble than the earlier ones, and is the very thrust of most of our mitzvot, Adam u'chavera, how we relate to the other, right? Rambam holds, surprisingly enough, considering the gist of this entire work, that it doesn't touch upon one's essential being, since it only comes into play in society and doesn't involve one's very being. As I say, in your own privacy, it's not part of it. Like material and physical shlemus, social shlemus says nothing about a person himself, so much as about how he relates to things and other people. Now, obviously, a side note is that how you relate to things and other people does usually say something about yourself as well.
Yeah, sure.
Right? This prioritizing certainly gives us pause and provides us with far deeper insight into this work as a whole. It suggests that Shemona Prokim serves as a sort of preparatory text towards the fourth highest level of shlemus, which concerns itself with one's personal perfection and the ability to achieve true humanness, which is rooted in having arrived at a true understanding of God Himself. As to the world to come, it's important to know that it is an entirely spiritual experience. Most of our sages understand it to be a state to which the world itself will evolve in the end of days after the Messianic era. So most of our sages say that at this point he's saying is that the world to come is not something that happens in the future. I'm sorry. It is something that happens in the future. It's not something that happens when you die. Your soul might return instead of to Olam Haba, to Olam HaEmes, the world of souls, and be waiting for this time to come. Right? Most of the sages understand it to be the state to which the world itself will evolve at the end of the days after the Messianic era, after 1,000 years of Messianic era. Rambam seems to understand it to refer to the afterlife. So it's Rambam who tells us that Olam Haba exists today. Our sages didn't believe that. Chazal didn't hold that way. Right? A close reading of that text can lead one to surmise, though, that the Rambam in fact subtly equates the afterlife with the end of days. As a matter of fact, his son, Avraham ben HaRambam, whom most scholars declare faithfully transmitted the teachings of his papa, explicitly equates it with the end of days in his Milchamot Hashem, the Wars of Hashem. We're almost done.
The Wars of Hashem, that's neat.
Yeah, that was written by Rambam's son. In either case, it will be completely a spiritual experience, far above our ken, our knowledge, and beyond our grasp. A perpetual, deep, abstract, clear, and unambiguous encounter with God. And we'll soon see, Rambam points out elsewhere that we physical beings cannot fathom the delight of the world to come any more than the blind can fathom the delight of color, the deaf can fathom the delight of sound or symphony, or a fish can fathom the delight of fire. You know, sitting around a campfire can be a very pleasurable experience. Not for a fish.
Not for a fish.
Right? A fish doesn't want to leave the water. Right? For only out-and-out pleasure we know of this kind is connected to eating, drinking, and the like. We cannot imagine much of anything else being delightful, with few exceptions. After all, many of us work extraordinarily hard to achieve many intangible things like honor, respect, or revenge. Nevertheless, as a rule, intangible, immaterial, and more spiritual things are usually beyond us, and will certainly have no need for bodily satisfaction in the world to come, any more than we need to have any self-interest served. Be that as it may, the world to come is a form of life without death, goodness without evil, where bodiless ministering angel-like souls of the righteous bask in God's glory by comprehending and grasping the very truth of God Himself. And thus, that's a quote, and thus enjoy a state of being that is unfathomably and incomparably and unparallelably greater than anything we can know in this world. In the end, what we're being promised here in this first section of the work is that Shemona Prokim will provide us with an understanding of the plain meaning of Pirke Avos, along with its psychology and ethics, as well as a peek into the sort of rigorous spiritual excellence offered to all who fulfill its promise.
Wow.